Hi, my name is Sean Patton and I run Stalking Savvy Environmental Consulting, and we do habitat restoration projects throughout Florida. And we're over here today at UCF working with Ideas for Us and the UCF Arboretum to do this lakeshore planting. We're doing this habitat restoration project to not only invite more birds, bees, butterflies, and fish, but also to help improve our water quality, reduce erosion, and add to the diversity of life here. This project has over 20 volunteers working at it today, and we're planting a wide variety of aquatic plants such as pickerelweed, duck potato, canna lilies, milkweeds, cypress trees, to help make this a viable habitat. It's not only the most environmentally friendly option, but also the best fiscal option, and I'm so happy to be working with Ideas for Us and the UCF Arboretum so that we can start teaching this place to be stalking savvy. Cypresses are trees that are used to extremely fluctuating water levels. In fact, some cypress swamps can see over 20-foot changes of water level in a year. Beach sunflowers are really nice dune stabilizing plants. They're also just very good for drought-tolerant landscaping. They're pollinator plants for a wide variety of insects, and they're drought-tolerant. Believe it or not, most of Florida actually is facing water shortages in the next 10 to 20 years, and some are already facing clean water shortages now. Why are we irrigating all this landscape that we're not eating or is not habitat just for show? There are many ground covers, some of which are walkable, that you can replace that with. So whenever you can save water, do it, because even though Florida's a swampy state, most of that's not clean drinking water. All right. So one of the nice things about habitat restoration is that we can do it in bulk. These are all baby milkweed plants. How many of you know what milkweed feeds? Yay, it's food for the monarch butterfly. And not just that, but it's also food for the queen and soldier butterflies as well, and two specific beetles, the longhorn beetles in Florida. If you don't have this one plant, you miss out on all 5 of those species. And there are a wide variety of milkweed plants in Florida, so they're a good plant to incorporate in a landscape. And 2 of them like aquatic environments. This is Asclepias incarnata, also known as the pink flowering milkweed or swamp milkweed. It's pretty good to put a little bit higher up on the shoreline. So this is kind of cool. One of the easy ways to work with aquatic plants is doing bare root material. This not only allows us to plant a lot more plants, but it allows us to move them for a lot cheaper and without having to use plastic pots for everything. Though all the plastic pots we do use are recycled material. So the nice thing about bare root material in aquatic plants is a lot of them are very easy to grow. With aquatic plants, you generally don't have to water them, you don't need to fertilize. In fact, in most aquatic ecosystems, you're dealing with an abundance of fertilizer. So this is knotted spike rush. It's one of the deepest growing rushes native to Florida. We can actually plant this up to 3 feet deep in the water, and it'll grow and stick out of the water. This is mostly used as fish habitat and for birds to use as nesting material, and it also produces a lot of small seed heads. This is a lovely baby Fakahatchee grass. Fakahatchee, like several other Florida native species, was actually on the endangered species list, similar to coontie for a time. And the reason it's coming back is because it's being used for restoration projects. It turns out it's pretty easy to restore endangered species if they look good. So that's another reason to use endangered species. And a lot of species like this, especially like coontie, have endangered pollinators or host plants. Like coontie has the Atala butterfly that feeds on it. A lot of skippers tend to eat these big native ornamental grasses. So even the grasses are important, and a lot of these guys used to be or are still on the endangered species list. So another reason to use natives. This is a baby duck potato. So duck potatoes are used for a wide variety of birds for seeds. They're also one of the deeper growing aquatic plants, able to grow 2 to 3 feet deep. Now, a lot of the times you all hear me saying their depth. These are the maximum depths that we can see these plants grow. When in doubt, plant shallower and let the plants grow deeper. There are 3 main zones in the aquatic habitat. There's the upland zone, which we are all standing on now. You know that we're upland because we're up on land and not in the water. Then we go a little bit further into the water where we're between the high water mark and the average water mark. That is called the riparian zone. That gets flooded for part of the year, but is dry part of the year. That's actually where most plants tend to live. But the way we develop in Florida is that we have the steep drop-off, and we skip the riparian zone. This is where you see plants like scarlet hibiscus, like the swamp milkweed, like blue flag iris. There are so many beautiful plants that live in these habitats that we need to make sure that we have this gentle, nice slope going into the pond. And in fact, many ponds are actually wetlands. If an entire lake is less than 3 feet deep, it's not a pond, it's a wetland. And then we get a little bit deeper and we hit the emergent zone. That's where this guy lives. So that is an area that's underwater almost the entire year, except for during major droughts. And that tends to be, between the average water mark and the lowest mean water mark. And the reason I have to give these averages is because, some lakes have huge changes, but it tends to max out at 3 feet deep of water. And then we get to the deepest area of the lake, littoral. That's where you see things like lily pads, Vallisneria, the aquatic grasses, tape grasses. You'll also see some things like bacopa growing down there in their aquatic form. Several plants, I don't have any with me today, have aquatic forms and terrestrial forms. And even stuff like this, when they're growing deeper in water, their stems will inflate with a little bit of air to help them stay upright and buoyant, whereas when they're on land, they kind of deflate. This is the golden canna lily. If you ever wanted to grow an aquatic plant, this is the one I'd recommend for starters. It's surprisingly drought tolerant if you forget about it, and it grows almost entirely through rhizomes. It can be grown through seed, but it needs an acid bath because usually the seeds only germinate after they go through an animal. Golden canna lilies will send out huge, thick rhizomes, and they're really good for shoreline stabilization, and they have beautiful golden flowers. The roots are also edible in some species of cannas. I don't think too many people have tried it with this one though, so tell me if you eat it. Pickerel weed. You all remember the water hyacinth I was telling you about earlier? This is the native version of it. The flowers are a little bit smaller, but it doesn't float around as its preferred habitat. It prefers to root. So it looks very similar, and it's a good native alternative. Florida has over 2,000 native species of plant. 400 are endemic to Florida. That means they are found nowhere else on Earth. So if you have a yard or a landscape, why would you plant that to look just like every other yard or landscape when you could have something completely unique on Earth? Plant native plants if you don't take anything else away from this, and there's so many cool plants. And this guy prefers the emergent to I've seen these guys grow over 3 feet deep and sometimes even on floating weed mats, which are something we're not going to be working with today. But you can also see these guys growing in riparian areas or even moist upland areas. So a lot of aquatic plants, again, they have a maximum depth but no minimum depth. And that's something you all are going to want to keep an eye out for. Remember, when in doubt, plant a little shallower, and we also need to plan for the rains to come up. So most of the planting we're going to be doing today is going to be around that water. We're going to put it right at the water's edge. That way, Carissa does not have to come out and water everything every day. That's annoying, especially when you're watering right next to a lake. It's redundant. So whenever we can make our lives a little easier, we'll do it. And also, does anyone know how much a plant like this might cost? A lot of aquatic plants range in price from around 50 cents to, like the trees are like up to $10, $20 depending on the size. And the bigger the plant, usually the more expensive. But again, this is very affordable. Habitat restoration is very affordable, especially when you do it on a large scale. Whenever you have an option to redo or fix a habitat, go ahead and do large sections of it. The more you do, the cheaper it is, and the more people you get to come out here and have fun with. Some of the reasons we're doing this are to help clean up our water quality. All water ends up in the ocean. And in fact, many of Florida waterways are impaired. This means that there's too much herbicides, fertilizers, pollution going into the waterways. And in fact, fertilizer is one of the biggest pollutants. Fertilizer makes plants grow. Well, there's no plants in this lake right now. So what do you think is going to grow? The only thing that's omnipresent in every single lake, because it's also airborne, are algae spores. Algae is in everything. If you leave a cup of water out long enough, algae will grow in it. So if you don't control the nutrients, you're going to get algae blooms. And if you just spray out the algae with an herbicide to make it look good, Well, the nutrients are still there. Nothing's going to take up those nutrients, so then there's two options. Either the algae regrows, but now it's herbicide resistant, which means it's going to have thicker mucuses. And I've actually seen algae mats over 60 feet wide around an entire lake. And those will suffocate all the plants or anything else that's growing in the lake, or some of them turn harmful, like red tide. There are freshwater versions of that. Microcystins were in the news in Lake Okeechobee, and that's due to nutrient pollution from agriculture. But not everywhere you blame agriculture. In Sarasota, for example, over 50% of our fertilizer usage is golf courses. So there's a lot of different areas where pollution can happen. And this is a great way to help prevent that while also providing habitat, while also providing erosion control. Eventually, you're either filling in ponds or they're eroding away. All freshwater bodies want to become marshes. They just fill in. There's no glacier dragging and dredging it back out. So unless you eventually want the soccer course to be lakefront property, you have to use something to help control the erosion. And plants are a great low-cost option. If you were to try to put a seawall around a lake this size, it could be up to $1,000 per foot. This is $15 to $45 per foot. And if you're like, well, you don't have to maintain a seawall, yeah, you do. About 50% of the upfront cost for any method of, erosion control is spent on maintenance. Seawalls erode, both underneath the front and a little bit behind the top. The only thing you have to do is keep out weeds for the first few years, and then it gets a lot easier. This is another reason why I prefer to do big plantings like this, is the more plants you put in, the higher your success rate. If you put in 100 plants, which sounds like a lot, but is actually not, I've seen a single fat turtle eat 10 plants. If you have a bunch of turtles, I've actually seen small plantings fail because of that, especially if you're putting in water lilies. Turtles love water lilies. In fact, turtles are probably my biggest enemy besides herbicides. So you can have a worse success rate with some of these soft, squishy, edible plants, whereas cypress trees tend to have almost like 100% success rate if you put them in right. But again, it's biology. One of the reasons I do a bigger variety than is usually required by the counties is like this pickerel weed, for example. It used to be 90% of all aquatic plants put into a lot of ponds and areas because it's very beautiful. However, it's also susceptible to a pickerel weed mite, and it's a disease that the mite carries. And so if you get that and all the pickerel weed in your lake is touching, you lose 90 to 95 or even 100% of your pickerel weed if it's pretty bad. Disease, herbivores, and other things can still happen, which is why having a diverse ecosystem can help mitigate that. And these plants are healthy, and even if we had I expect usually 90% of plants to survive and start growing, but accidents happen, disease happens, herbicides happen. This is a college. If someone is bad at driving and they hit the plants, that might kill them. Again, this is the low-cost option, and even if the plants get cut, oftentimes they'll regrow from their roots if they've had time to establish a little bit. So these plants are resilient, and once you get them in, you'll be seeing them for years to come. So there's a pretty good success rate. And in fact, I actually have recently done a series of HOA success stories where the solution was far cheaper than other solutions, like just planting was easier than, putting rocks around the shoreline or seawalls, and it actually helped fix the algae issues, and their homeowner prices went up because there were more birds, otters, fish, and there were no algae blooms. So there's a ton of reasons to do this, and not many reasons not to. It's low risk, high reward. So the soil's still moist right now, but we're going to plant a little bit lower right next to the water's edge, and then when the water comes up, the plants should have rooted by then. So, and if they do pop out, just stick them back in. Again, a lot of these plants are pretty strong. And pickerel weed is one of the weird plants where if the water level comes up too fast, like say the water level jumps up 4 or 5 feet, it will actually break off sometimes and float around and find new places to root. So you might plant this shoreline, and then over the next few years, you'll see them pop up throughout the rest of the shoreline. That saves us a lot of work. It self-does it. But again, the more plants you put in up front, the better the success rate. With a lot of this bare root material, which is unusual for people to plant, most people are used to planting pots. With pots, you just kind of, dig out a little bit bigger than the pot, and especially a little bit more down. That way there's some loose soil for the roots to kind of go through. When you take the plant out of the pot, you want to loosen the root ball a little bit. You can be a little rough with them. And then you want to put the plant in, fill it in, You don't need to fertilize aquatic plants. You don't fertilize aquatic plants. We're dealing with high nutrient issues. Don't fertilize near your lakes. Don't fertilize near your wetlands. The water carries all those nutrients. If you fertilize, I've seen lake companies throw bags of fertilizer into rival company lakes to cause algal blooms and get their opponents fired. It's that easy. We know the science. Don't fertilize near water bodies. In fact, most plants don't need to be fertilized. If you add a little bit of compost, that's great. If you add just like a little bit of fertilizer amendments, or use things like legumes and mimosas to help add nitrogen to the soil, you can skip fertilizers entirely. And then for the bare root stuff, you just stick a trowel in the soil, lift up, stick the plant in, stick down, pat, pat. But no, it's pretty easy. And the nice thing about these bare root plants is they don't have a big root ball. So they're a little bit more delicate, but once you get them into the soil, they grow a lot, they're a lot easier to plant, and you can order a lot more. And again, bulk tends to be better with this. If you're doing your personal landscape, get 3 or 4 nice plants and you'll be fine. But with big habitat restoration projects, more is always better. All right, I think we're good. Let's get to planting.